Hello and welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, your daily guide to decoding current affairs, the smart way for UPSC examination. It's January 7th and today's edition brings two important articles for mains examination. First, the grasslands in national climate plans, why these often neglected ecosystems matter for climate resilience, biodiversity and sustainable land use. Second, we will discuss about the connection between terrorism and the UAPA Act, examining the law's objectives, concerns around civil liberties in the country. Finally, in our simplified section, we will be covering key updates which are highly crucial for the upcoming prelims 2026 examination. So let's begin. Hey guys, welcome back to Analyst. I hope all of you are doing well. I hope your preparation is going fine. I also would like to take this opportunity to wish all of you Happy New Year. I hope you achieve your dreams of becoming an IAS officer this year itself. I hope all of you clear prelims with highest amount of marks, and that is why we have to focus on the discussion today, where we have very important topics. Firstly, related to grasslands in the country. And here, recently, the United Nations has declared that 2026, that is this new year, is going to be the international year for rangelands and pastoralists. And this is where these two types of lands bring focus on the need for preservation of our grasslands. Now, this is a very detailed topic in the Hindu. We are going to deconstruct it step by step in the discussion following. Now, when we start from the absolute basics, I first want all of you to focus on this picture. It's a very beautiful land where you see a lot of different shrub-like plants, grasses. Sometimes you also will be seeing a little amount of trees interspersed within the same. These are actually what we know as grasslands. If UPSC is asking a question in mains examination, you need a proper definition for it. So, grasslands are open ecosystems, guys, where these are dominated by grasses and herbaceous plants with two important characteristics. Firstly, there must be very few or scattered trees. As you can also see in this figure, we do not have a lot of predominance of trees here. Also, these particular ecosystems are highly dependent on fire, grazing and seasonal rainfall. Now you will be wondering why at all grasslands are prone to fires and grazing and seasonal rainfall. Firstly, you have to understand that grasslands are those areas in the various parts of our countries which actually receive a very limited amount of rainfall. Also, due to limited amount of rainfall, we also see that such areas are actually dry. Now, you know that whenever we have drier conditions, the leaves, the various branches, the twigs, they all become dried up. And during some activities such as wind, these come in friction against each other and they create fires. And that is why, guys, it will be very shocking for all of you. But it is true that fire is a very natural component of every grassland ecosystem, if not all. So that is why, you know, guys, the water limit and the fire limit is extremely important in categorizing something or some land as grassland. Also, you know, guys, that such areas are abundant in grasses. And this is why you find that a lot of animal herders, a lot of pastoralist groups, they love grasslands. And that is why even in India, in the state of Gujarat, we have the Bunny grasslands. So there are a lot of indigenous communities within the same. In the comments, someone can let me know what are the names of some communities in the Bunny grasslands. Now, when we talk about one important key point, which often many people confuse with, is that grasslands are degraded forests. Many people tell that, okay, grasslands do not have a lot of trees, you do not have a lot of biodiversity, but they are completely wrong. Grasslands are actually at the intersection of plains sometimes and the mountainous valleys and the hills. So we can tell or categorize in some cases the grasslands as ecotone regions. These are the intersections between two different ecosystems where you have one of the most highest biodiversities in the entire world. So there is a key misconception here that grasslands are degraded forests. No, they are actually ancient and distinct ecosystems which have thrived for centuries, which have kind of stuck in ecological succession till the time of, say, shrubs or grasses. And there is a PYQ from 2013. I want all of you to answer this just after the discussion that we had as of now. Now, moving on. When we talk about the major types of grasslands in the entire world, we find that, okay, we have savanna, prairies and steppes. If you actually understand the location of the same, find most of the grasslands are scattered over Europe and Asia. We also have the same in North America, where these are generally known as prairies. Also, we have the same in South America. So, if you can see, grasslands are predominant in almost all of the continent, except, obviously the Antarctica, right? So because we have to understand there are ecological limits, this is why you can understand the climatic types and zones of these worlds, which actually gave the rise of grasslands. Now, we have to come to the topic right now, guys. We have discussed the basics for all of you. Now, understand one thing, guys. Grasslands are very rich in biodiversity. They are actually very huge stores of carbon dioxides too, because guys, there are lots of grasses, there are lots of different plant species, also a lot of animals and microorganisms live within the soil of the grasslands. That is why the grasslands of the world, they are very instrumental in capturing a lot of carbon dioxide due to climate change. Obviously, we do not have a lot of trees with us, but the grasses and the shrubs and the various plants, they are not actually very less. They also absorb a lot of carbon dioxide. But what is happening right now is that the global climate action, as all of you know, right, there is the huge rising instances of global warming, rising amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So most of the global groups which focus on climate change, they try to plant more trees. Simply they believe that afforestation is the solution to climate change, if not all of the solutions within the same. So what the groups are doing, what major countries are also doing, what the governments are also doing, is they are clearing of the grasslands. Firstly, some people are setting up their farms and they are doing cultivation. Secondly, which is the most harmful thing, is that the world is right now clearing of the grasslands and doing more afforestation there. They're clearing of the natural ecosystem because they believe that a forest is actually much more biodiverse area where you have more number of trees there. So there is a misconception that the more number of trees you have, the higher amount of carbon dioxide concentration it can pull out from the atmosphere into the soils. It is completely wrong. Also, when we actually understand about the various afforestation projects, it is very easy to plant samplings and trees and label it as afforestation. So generally we see that the various trees which are being afforested or the various plantation models that we are following, right, these are not suitable for grasslands. Also, there is the new trend of including carbon markets and afforestation together. Guys, that carbon markets operate on the principle of carbon credits. You get credits when you, for example, plant a tree, because the tree will be absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So that is why you are actually helping the environment. You are sucking down the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the more number of trees you plant, the greater number of carbon credits you will get. And these carbon credits are very lucrative for you because you can actually sell it for money in the markets. So what the people are doing, what majorly companies are doing right now, they are planting more trees, they are claiming more carbon dioxides. What even the farmers are doing, they are extending their farmlands already which are present within the grasslands, and they are encroaching the natural boundaries of grasslands, and they are planting trees. They are actually doing commercialization of agriculture, which also gives them sometimes carbon credits. All of these are leading to degradation of the grasslands here. So there is a false narrative in the world right now that the more number of trees, the better it is for the climate. But scientific evidence, scientific reality tells otherwise. That if you actually convert grasslands into forests, you destroy native biodiversity. Think about all the plants, all the native plants and the animals which live there. Also, whenever we are trying to convert the grasslands into agricultural lands or afforestation, plantation models, what do? You disturb the soil of the region because that soil is suited for the grasslands there. And that is where you release soil carbon. You actually, when you are planning to do something for the climate, you are actually trying to deteriorate it by releasing further soil carbon into the atmosphere. So greater amount of carbon dioxide will fuel further amount of global warming. And at the end of the day, the grasslands are suited to fires, right? So I have told it in the very first slide also that grasslands and fire, they go together because fire limits grasslands, and obviously this is a natural ecosystem feature for them. But when we do commercialization of agriculture, we do afforestation, we actually prevent fires, and this slow and gradual buildup of fire, when we try to suppress the same, when we try to suppress the fire, this actually leads to a buildup of much more wildfires in the region. And this is what we are also seeing in various parts of Africa, North America, and also Latin America. So this is what is happening. And alongside the same, let us summarize right now the various causes of grassland destruction, which you can put in your answers. Firstly, agricultural expansion is leading to habitat loss for the various native species and also for the various fauna in the region. Also, when we are doing afforestation and plantations, it is leading to an ecological mismatch and disturbing soil carbon too. Next is a very important point, guys. There are so many grasslands all across the world, underneath of which we find huge amount of hydrocarbon reserves. For example, crude oil or natural gas. Now these lead to fragmentation of the grasslands, and that is why this is a much more greater risk. And at the end of the day, right now, when we are doing agriculture, for example, near the grasslands, we are planting new plants, new crops, which are kind of bringing also some other kinds of herbs, which are invasive species. For example, these species are not native to the grassland, right? And this leads to the loss of the native species there. Because this invasive species, sometimes it can be frogs, it can be some other plants, it can be some other weed, right? All these things, this lead to the eradication of the natural native species there. Also, if I can quote a 1999 down to earth article here, we find that in India, as of now still, we do not have a uniform data on the grasslands of our country, which is conducted on a national level. We have so many other forest surveys, we have so many other state specific surveys, after which we can calculate roughly and approximately the length of our, or say the extent of our grasslands. So in India, we also lack the central data measuring aspect of our grasslands. So it was there in 1954 to 62, and back then our grasslands were classified into 5 types. Right now, what remains of that is actually up to anyone's guess, as also this article is talking about. Now this kind of grasslands and the names are very important for you in your prelims examination, guys. So please do note it down in your class notes or in your handout, wherever you feel like. Now, let us come to the United Nations and the fight against climate change. Guys, United Nations have been very elaborate when it comes to climate change. The 1992 Rio Earth Summit actually gave birth to 3 major conventions, which also right now are functioning on an international scale. For example, we have the UNFCCC, which actually on an annual basis also hosts the Conference of Parties on Climate Change. The COP, recently the COP also concluded. In the comments you let me know where was the same. Also, UNFCCC focuses on carbon and emissions. We also have the Convention on Biological Diversity, which focuses mainly on the biodiversity of various countries and the need for preservation of the same. And lastly, we have the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which actually looks into the cause of land degradation. In nowhere you find an international protocol which is trying to preserve these huge tracts of land. As you can see, grasslands are actually one of the largest ecosystems, if you can understand, right? But still that after the same, we do not have a uniform convention to protect the grasslands, because grasslands kind of depend upon these 3 conventions, and the need for greater cooperation between countries when it comes to grasslands is actually very weak. Now, whenever we talk about the various policies to protect the various grasslands of our country and also the international grasslands, the policies are also not very clear as to what are the various need or the steps that we should take to preserve the same. So, grasslands are not sometimes also limited to some countries, and that is why we need a lot of cooperation to protect and preserve some grasslands. So this is why, recently in the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, COP number 16, in Saudi Arabia, we actually kind of signed a resolution L15. Now, this L15 resolution kind of recognized grasslands for the first time as socio-ecological system, because it is not only the ecosystems we are talking about, it is also about the various groups of pastoralists, various indigenous communities, and obviously at the end of the day, the various economic benefits we get from grasslands. So all the nomadic groups and the various aspects there, they also generate a lot of economic systems. Let us look at two case studies first. One in a developed country and one in a developing country. Firstly, when we talk about Australia's grasslands. Now, Australia's grasslands, you have to understand guys, it is covering around 1/3 of Australia's land mass. So you can understand the huge extent of lands there. Correct? And also in Australian deserts, we have various areas of rangelands where these are also some categories of grasslands if we can try to loosely categorize it. Now, due to climate change, there are lots of heat waves in Australia. For example, right now it is summer in Australia, and mostly on an annual basis we hear that there are bushfires in Australia. Right? So these are kind of intense amount of heat wave induced wildfires in those grasslands. And you know that in Australian grasslands we have the kangaroo, we have the koala, and we have so many other species which actually perish off due to such wildfires. Also, there have been huge instances of flash floods, and the degradation of grasslands due to such anthropological human reasons have led to intense amount of flash floods, because generally the grasslands used to restrict the huge amount of or heavy amount of rainfall and the soil used to absorb the same. Right now, if the grasslands are not there, it is leading now to rising instances of flash floods. Also, when we talk about the various invasive species here, we also see that the buffalo grass and the various other invasive species, they're leading to a loss of the native species. And this is where the Indigenous Desert Alliances work, which is a kind of an alliance in Australia which is working against this kind of degradation of the grasslands. So this is where they take various measures, they take monitoring, they also take wildfire measures in Australia. And Australia is a developed country, and this is why they have the resources to do so. Now imagine what is the situation in Brazil. So there is an area known as the Cerrado, which is one of the world's largest and most biodiverse savannas in the entire world. And actually, there is a very old saying that if there is no Cerrado, there will be no Amazon basin. And also on the map you can see this is a location. But right now, more than twice of the land which is being lost in the Amazons, the same is being seen in the Cerrado grasslands. Also, 70% of Brazil's agricultural toxic wastes are dumped on the same. So if you can understand that 8 of Brazil's 12 river systems emerge from such grasslands, and if they are degraded, you can only imagine what will be the condition here. Now, when we consider India, India also has widespread amount of grasslands. Firstly, when we look at our alpine region, the mountainous region, we have a huge and beautiful scenic amount of grasslands scattered all across the northern and the northeastern India. Also, when we talk about the Shola grasslands in the Western Ghat, these are also very scenic and beautiful grasslands which are also home to a lot of tribal groups and indigenous pastoralists. The same can also be told of Gujarat. Right now, according to a white paper by Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, now the Indian grasslands across the various states are governed by 18 different ministries, guys. You can only understand the confusion and the conflicting objectives of the 18 different ministries. Instead of bringing the grasslands, say, under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, we have the Ministry of Water, we have the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, we have so many other ministries which are having some jurisdiction over the grasslands. So it will be leading to confusion, guys. So you must have heard the term that too many cooks spoil the broth. So this is what the case is here. Also, according to various Government of India report, we also are seeing 31% decline between 2005 and 2015 alone in the grasslands. And such grasslands are home to various amounts of groups of pastoralists and also agrarian groups such as the Konas. So this is where it leads, and it is actually very important for us to preserve the same. Firstly, we must be trying to preserve the grasslands and recognize them as distinct ecosystems than forests, right? Because we cannot club it under forest, and also we cannot tell that the grasslands are some separate amount of, say, forest ecosystems. We have to give them some distinction. Also, we have to include our grasslands in the nationally determined contributions. So, for example, in 2026 as of now, India's current NDC, when it comes to the degraded lands, we have to firstly restore those degraded lands, and we have to actually build 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 sink. So this can be done via forests. That is fine. Also, this can be done if we try to actually preserve our grasslands and restore the degraded grasslands too. Because right now the grasslands are excluded from the category of the same. So let us actually distinctly recognize it. And if we are not doing the same, it is leading to afforestation on natural grasslands, and we have just seen what are the ill outcomes of the same. Also, grasslands must be treated across all the 3 Rio conventions. So there must be specific clauses and articles for preservation of grasslands in the country. Also, the community land rights, for example, the various communities in the Banni grasslands, they are facing land eviction from their grasslands because someone wants to do agriculture, someone wants to set up industries. Sometimes they are also not paid compensation, which is also against the Forests Right Act. So this is where we have to empower the Gram Sabha there at the local level, because the Forest Rights Act actually empowers the Gram Sabha to take the major decisions there, and also to grant various land rights and titles to individuals and communities. And at the end of the day, we have to stop the fossil fuel excavations on our grasslands. We have to preserve them, because firstly the soil carbon is disturbed, secondly more fossil fuel, more climate change. And this is why the agribusiness lobby must lobby for some constructive things. Let us do agriculture on the agricultural land, let us not spread the grasslands anymore. So this is where we try to wrap up the discussion right now here. You have a question in front of you, please do let me know in the comments below. We'll now moving on to the next one. Guys, the 2020 Delhi riot case is again in the news because Supreme Court actually denied bail to 2 individuals, and this brings focus on the very fundamental act, that is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. And this is where we are not going to discuss about the various detailed provisions of the same, but we are going to trace the origin of the act, which is the main highlight in this article. We are going to also look into what are the issues and what can be done according to various international based standards. So for prelims, for GS2 and GS3, this topic is extremely important. Firstly, let us actually understand the timeline of the UAPA Act, and this is why, guys, to understand any important major act in the country, it is important to understand what the very origin, how the act was in the very beginning, and what the act right now. So this is where the phase 1 begins in 1967 when the UPA Act was actually enacted. Now, guys, since independence, India fought with so many issues. Firstly, regionalism, language, and also sectarianism. We also have seen how various states also tried to secede from India. So the new India, which was in 1950s, 60s, it was very fragmented, guys. So as of now, when we talk about United India, as of now, the feeling of patriotic and the various amounts of emotions that is associated with the country, it was quite low at the time of independence, because there were several groups, there were several interest groups which were vying for their own interests, and that is why the need for national unity was envisaged for the first time when we set up the National Integration Council. So Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in 1961, he set up the National Integration Council to actually bring in the various state chief ministers, to bring in even the celebrities, right, to actually foster a Indian statement and Indian sentiment across the country. Also, we enacted the 16th Constitutional Amendment where we added the terms sovereignty and integrity to Article 19. This itself should tell you that back in those days, there were issues of this, integrity and sovereignty of our country. And also, the various oaths to some offices under third schedule of our constitution, they were also changed, and they were made actually much more towards uniting India and fostering that feeling of Indianness. Now, this act initially did not focus on terrorism. It was initially focused on holding various people accountable who actually promote secessionary behavior. Now, gradually in 2004, this act was again changed. It was amended. Right now, the UPA government actually repealed the very controversial Prevention of Terrorism Act due to the various misuse by various agencies. Now, the UAPA was brought in. Now, for the first time, guys, this chapter 4 was introduced, which specifically had punishment for terrorism activities. New offenses were added where section 15 was added, where unlawful activities was broadened to include acts which cause disaffection against India. This means that for the first time, you actually bring terrorism under UAPA. Now, let us look at more evolution, then the full picture will be clear to you why UAPA right now is one of the most powerful acts in the country. The main picture, the main story actually starts from here in 2008, when we saw the disheartening instance of 2611 in Mumbai, where that these were the dastardly attacks by some Pakistani stooges and the Pakistani cowards to spread terror in the country on a very wide scale. So that is when 2008 was the year which again saw the amendment to the UAPA. Now there was a very curious term which was included in 2008, by any other means. So this phrase was added in UAPA intentionally, which broadened the scope of identifying some organizations or some activities as terrorism activities. So this means that the various individuals who were convicted of terrorism activities, right, they use some force, arms, ammunition and various other things. So all of these plus various other things also were kind of clubbed under this clause, by any other means. Also, the custody in police was increased to 30 days from 15, judicial custody to 180 days from 90, bail was made impossible, which exists till date as of now. Because right now the onus of the bail will fall on the judge. Now the judge must be 101% satisfied that person is not terrorist based on the evidence furnished by the police. Now you can understand, just imagine one situation. If you are a judge and if the police in front of you is presenting all the evidence of that person, that look at his chats, look at his arms and ammunition, look at the various association that you have. But on the other hand, the terrorist, the so-called accused terrorist is pleading innocent. So whom you will listen to? To be safe and also for your own national security, you will actually side with the police and the evidence. So you will not give them bail. So here the satisfaction of judge is very important right now in giving bail. If the judge and also the police comes to an agreement that the prima facie or on the face of it, the evidence is true, bail becomes very, very difficult. And that is why people who are convicted under this particular act, they find it very difficult to get bail. Because the police definitely, they will be furnishing various evidence and the judge also will be not be satisfied with the various kind of representations. Finally, another important change was when the burden of proof was actually shifted on the accused. Now the terrorist, the so-called accused terrorist, that person has to prove that he is not actually accused, that he is innocent. And that is where, the person will be presumed guilty if not proven otherwise. And finally, the phase 4, the last phase of the various amendments in the UAPA was made in such a way that in 2012, various economic activities were included under the UAPA. For example, say, terrorism and its scope and definition were expanded to economic aspects too. For example, financial stability, food security, and even counterfeit currency. If anyone is actually convicted under such charges, that you are threatening the food security of our country, that you are threatening the counterfeit channels of various currencies, so all of these activities will be classified as terrorism activities again. Just because, guys, economy is a very integral part when we talk about even the sovereignty of our country. Also, companies and trusts were bought under the law. This was bought under section 22A C. Now, in 2019, various individuals, they were classified as terrorists for the first time legally under this act. Now, this was a very important legislation, guys. In 2019, apart from organizations, individual persons can be designated as terrorists. In 2019, guys, there were actually a lot of terrorism activities which took place in India before 2019. That is why the government of India thought of doing this. And the NIA, the National Investigative Agency, is actually having the widest amount of powers under this act. Who can actually see, search, they can actually do anything with the properties of such terrorists without even the consent of the state governments. So this is where, we have seen that the UAPA Act actually came from an act which sought to reduce the cessationary activities in 1967 to an act today right now which is focused on identifying terrorism, also trying to define it, also trying to find out the various types of terrorism, even economic terrorism, and also how to classify even persons as terrorists, and also the various aspects of police custody, judicial custody, anticipatory bail, regular bail, bail test, burden of proof. Everything was drastically changed over the period of, the next 60 years since the legislation of this particular act. So that is why under this act, it is popularly also said by various, political experts that jail actually becomes the rule and bail becomes the exception. So once anyone is convicted under the UAPA, jail becomes imminent, his future is gone, and also getting bail will be very difficult because the accused simply cannot prove with the various evidence because that person is in jail. So most importantly, you have to realize that once convicted, that person may rot in jail forever. And this is what is happening with these two individuals, Umar Khalid and Sarjil Imam. In relation to the 2020 Northeast Delhi riot case, in which they are supposedly charged of making some anti-Indian statement, and also recently they are convicted of so many other connections and implications too. The Supreme Court actually relied on the section 15 of the UAPA, which is dealing with the definition of a terrorist act. It includes the act committed using explosives, firearms, weapons, etc., or by any other means. Even if you pass an anti-India statement on a public platform, or if you try to foster an anti-India sentiment, by any other means, remember I discussed, by any other means you will be labeled as a terrorist, because by such means you are threatening the sovereignty, integrity and security of our country, or you are trying to strike terror among our Indian citizens, and you are trying to divide them, and you are trying to spread terror. So let this sink in, guys, because section 15 is a very important section, and this is why these two individuals are finding it extremely difficult to get bail, and I doubt that they would get bail in the near future anytime soon. And such any other means is the most controversial also. While on the other hand, so far we have discussed about the need for such stringent measures. On the other hand, we have to also talk about individual freedom and security and dignity too. Because sometimes even non-violent acts, protests and speeches and mobilization, maybe according to some experts and political critics, if these things are done against the ruling government, then they can also levy UAPA. So what will be done in that case? Will then jail become the rule and bail the exception, or the otherwise? Because every case needs to be evaluated on a case-to-case basis. So that is why an extremely wide definition of terrorism or terrorist act is kind of problematic sometimes, and that is why this act, apart from the various good things that it has done so far, it also faces a lot of criticism, guys. And this is why I have tried to collect some of the criticism which I have gathered from various other political activists. They are telling that there has been an over criminalization of dissent in the country. Dissent is that thing where you can criticize the government, or where you can actually try to constructively give some feedback to the government in public, or you can actually express the freedom of your thought, expression. This is where UAPA sometimes can be bought in to curtail your dissents, and there have been so many journalists apparently and allegedly who have been kind of labeled as terrorists by the ruling government. There have been so many NIA raids at some politicians' house or some journalists' locations and even some media houses under this act. Now, these are what the political activists are saying. So, this is raising various constitutional tensions, right? Section 43E is telling that if an accused is found with arms, ammunition, articles which are used for spreading of terror, right, the courts must presume guilt. But what happened if sometimes, maybe, for example, in a fictitious world, just imagine this, if the police itself plants such evidence against some person who is criticizing the government, then what would be the case? Right? So this is where such vague definitions need to be defined, because these vague definitions are actually going to the court, and the courts judge sometimes do not try to give bail, because they look at the evidence, they look at the case, and they try to solve the matter by not giving bail. Also, there have been various instances of overreach when it comes to fundamental rights of the persons who have been convicted under UAPA. Right? For example, Article 19, Article 20, or their innocence, and also sometimes the due process of law is not followed. So all of these things are breached, and these are Indian citizens we are talking about. They are not getting their rights with reference to such act. Also, we also have prolonged incarceration, or these people languish in jail for a long period of time. They languish in police custody, in judicial custody, and in the loop which repeats again and again without any conviction. And such things have a chilling effect on free speech. For example, if all these things are happening, the persons who would like to criticize the government on a constructive basis, some policies or various other things, they will not be able to exercise it properly. So here, my question to all of you right now is that, what do you think is more important, state security or the balance between the same and civil liberties? What is the solution here? Let us look at some of the international ones. For example, when it comes to the definition of terrorism acts or terrorist, right, we do not have a uniformly agreed international definition of terrorism. It is to be noted, guys, here. But for example, Germany has separated political extremism from terrorism or terrorist violence. So we can also try to do that in our UAPA. Also, we can restore bail as a rule and jail as an exception under, for example, if we can talk about the US Patriot Act, which is their very popular act against terrorism. The courts assess flight risk, evidence strength, and proportionality, also the various amounts of, say, jail terms, they have sunset clauses. So all these things are considered. Next, the European Court of Human Rights, they are against this prolonged pre-trial detention of some accused persons which go against their own personal liberty. Also, independent sanction and oversight mechanism, for example, say in the UK, there is an independent reviewer of terrorism litigation. So a third party or any kind of other think tank, they individually review the various clauses of terrorism legislation in the UK. Also, in India, we can have independent review committees consisting of retired Supreme Court judges or High Court Chief Justices, which can look into some case-specific matters impartially. Also, we must be having written reasoned approval of the various police authorities when they are charging any person under the same. Also, data transparency must be there. Accountability and sometimes compensation must be given to the people who have lost their precious life in jail. As of now, we do not have such provisions. So in UK, for example, detailed reports are published annually when it comes to the anti-terrorism acts in the country. So we can also learn from these kind of legislations, and maybe we can have a better act also in the future. While the security and the sovereignty of the country is important, we have to also understand safeguarding personal liberty and rights. They also go hand in hand. So there is a mains PYQ in 2019. There is also this question right now. You can let me know in the comments below. Now I will go on to the simplified articles. In this article, we are going to look into the recent report by Niti Aayog on the performance of India's free trade agreements, which are very crucial for your prelims and GS3 when we look about our external economy. Now guys, you know that free trade is good for all. The less number of tariffs, the more number of trade. And this is what the WTO also argues for. And this is why various countries have agreements between themselves when it comes to trade. The first one starts with the preferential trade agreement, where two countries or more than two countries, they can come together, they can sit and discuss on a few number of goods on which we can have lower tariffs than others. Then we have the free trade agreement, where two or more countries, they can come together. They will tell that okay, on 90 or to around 95 to 96% of the goods that we trade between ourselves, the tariffs will be removed altogether, and there will be a minor goods which come under negative list. Their tariffs can be there, but they can be also be reduced in the future. After this, we have the CEPA or the CECA, where we have the components of FTA within it, and we also include services, we also include investment, we also include the intellectual property rights or the patents. So this is what you can understand, guys, is a more evolved form of an FTA. This you can know that this is an advanced form of free trade agreement, where we are not only talking about goods, we are also talking about services, investment and patents. So this is what we also have with the various countries such as UAE, right, also with Japan and others. Now, the next step beyond CEP or CECA is customs union. So this is what we see in the Eurasian Economic Union, where we have the similarities between free trade agreement, and also all of these countries which are part of the customs union, they will be having a common external tariff against the various other countries which are not part of the customs union. Next comes the common market, where we have the European single market here. So here the common market talks about the customs union. So customs union must be there, those features must be there. Also, most importantly guys, there must be free flow of labor and capital, and that is why you see the Eurozone there, where the level of economic integration is very deep. The most useful amount of economic integration perhaps is the economic union, where it is our own EU or the European Union. This also has been covered in the Analyst recently, right? So let me know where the headquarters of EU is. Also, the European Union or the Economic Union is such an union where we not only have a common or customs union or a free movement of labor and capital, right? We also have a common currency. We have a common federal bank or the central bank. We have common monetary policy, almost kind of common fiscal policies, right? So this is where the policies, institutions, they all come together. So now when we are talking about FTAs, we're actually talking about, not a very deep level of economic integration here. So when we talk about this report, which the Niti Aayog names as Trade Watch Quarterly Report, this can also be important for your prelims. So this report is telling that we are importing kind of more from our FTAs. So countries with whom we have FTAs, we are importing more rather exporting. So this is actually leading to loss. But within our exports, one sector is very impressive, which is the electronic sector. They have risen almost by 50%, right? And this is the star performer there. And we have to understand the overall kind of balance is in such a way that we are facing a trade deficit, and this trade deficit has increased by around 60%, which is quite huge. Now, what are the reasons? The first reason is the ASEAN region. In Singapore, we are having a trade deficit of around 13%. In Malaysia, we are having a trade deficit of 40%. In Thailand, 8%. In Vietnam, minus 10%. So, if we can look into the ASEAN countries, on a total, we are actually facing a trade deficit of approximately 17%. And this has also been on the lines of the recent agreement between ASEAN and China, where ASEAN and China have actually kind of upgraded their FTA in October 2025, and soon after that we have seen some of the volumes of exports from India is decreasing. Now, the second big trend is when we talk about the various sunrise sector in our country. As of now, that is our electronic sector. Now, electronic sector, if you have just seen the statistics, they have almost increased by say 47% year on year, and this is a very good sign for us, guys. We are trying to export more smartphones, more electronic items from the country, where the success of PLI or the Make in India or the various other manufacturing schemes are visible for the very first time. So here, when we actually skip the manufacturing sector and the development in 1991 reform, we are actually focusing on right now. So that is a very good sign that India gradually is also kind of integrating into the global value chains, wherein the entire world is right now thinking of a China plus one strategy. That is why major big tech companies, the manufacturing giants, they're coming into India. In India, states like Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, where they are setting up their own plants, machinery to actually make India integrated in the global value chains. And at the end of the day, the third trend is where we have to look into where we are trying to import from and what are the various import substances that we are doing. Firstly, from UAE, we are trying to import gold, petroleum. Then from China, we are reliant on the various technological aspects. Then from Iraq, again, we are trying to import crude oil and various soybean oil, right? So these are all what we have to understand, that on an average basis, we are kind of importing around 16.3% more from the last year from China, right? Also from the same with reference to UAE and Iraq. So this means that our imports are actually on the rise. And this brings us the focus on the recently concluded FTA and the future FTAs too. For example, recently Oman, New Zealand and UK, they signed FTAs with India in 2025. And also India is in active negotiations with reference to FTA to be signed with EU, US, which has been in the news, Australia, Bahrain, Gulf Cooperation Council, the Eurasian Economic Union, Canada, South African Customs Union, right? All of these are taking place right now. Also, we are trying to have a preferential trade agreement with Brazil and Israel. This means that if our own trade deficit is increasing, that means we are doing something wrong in the negotiations of the FTA. So let this be the way forward, that in 2026 and beyond, when we are trying to negotiate with the countries with reference to the FTA, we have to negotiate for our own exporters also. So now let's move on to a PYQ in 2018. Taking hint from this, you let me know what is the answer. Now we will be moving on to the next one. Guys, according to our Renewable Energies Minister, our solar module manufacturing capacity has more than doubled in 2025, and this is a very significant news, guys, because this year-on-year growth, right, has been positioning India on an international scale when we talk about solar panel manufacturing. Now, when we talk about solar panels, the very basic thing is the solar cell, as you can see here. Now, after someone manufactures a solar cell, then we get a solar module which is consisting of various solar cells. Now, when we try to fit in various appliances, battery, inverters and so many other electronic components to a solar module, it becomes a solar panel. Now, according to the ministry, we have increased our solar module manufacturing by 62 times in 11 years. But the main thing that is to be noted is that we did not yet increase the intense amount of manufacturing of solar cells. Here, we are still dependent on China with reference to the various amounts of, say, raw materials and the various specialized equipments, electronics, which are needed to manufacture solar cells. We are still lagging behind China. Now, let us actually know what was behind this huge boom of solar module manufacturing in the country. Firstly, we had the PLI scheme. PLI scheme for solar energy is at the tune of 1.76 lakh crore, which has boosted manufacturing in the country. And right now, when we talk about the total installed capacity which was added in 2025, it was around 144 gigawatts, which is not a matter of joke. Next pillar is the approved list of modules and manufacturer, wherein, for example, if you want to take a solar subsidy from the government, because maybe you are taking avail of the Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, wherein on your rooftop you are installing some solar modules and solar panels, right? Now, if you go to the market and you want to take the subsidy under this scheme, you have to buy from only those approved list of modules and manufacturers which the government of India has under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy website, or say the various documents there. So this ensures that you buy from Indian manufactured companies, and also you stay away from those Chinese ones. And recently, India also raised the basic customs duty, which is kind of acting like a wall when it comes to the huge amount of import reliance that India has on China. So if we try to increase the duty, less number of solar manufactured importers and enterprises in the country, in India, will be importing from China. So they have to produce more in the country. So it is good for the country because it creates more amount of industrial enterprise, skills, jobs and economic growth. Now, when we talk about the various other initiatives which also was behind this boom indirectly, there are various states in the country such as Andhra Pradesh, Telangana who are focusing on solar module manufacturing. Also, the domestic content requirement for the government owned companies like ACCL or NTPC, they have to actually buy from Indian companies. Also, the GST rates on the solar related equipments, they have been rationalized and brought down to 5% from say around 28 to 18% previously, right? Also, the International Solar Alliance, which is kind of an initiative led by India to power the areas between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, because these are the solar surplus regions of the entire world. India is also part of the same. India is also a physical and a regional part of the International Solar Alliance. So this is where we are also trying to promote the same in the country. Also, at the end of the day, we have the Make in India mission, the National Manufacturing Mission, under which we have the clean tech manufacturing. This is also aiming to boost the ecosystem for solar PV cells, EV batteries, motors and controllers, among various other things. So this is what was actually behind this big boom, and we expect to see much more. On to the next one. In this one, we are actually talking about the basics of biomaterials, which are extremely important for your prelims and mains topic of biotechnology. Now, at the very beginning, the article says that the biomaterials are those objects which are derived wholly or partly from biological sources, or even from engineered sources using biological processes. Now, these are actually designed to replace or interact with the conventional materials. This means, for example, say if I am talking about a plastic, guys, plastic is a very polluting object, and the alternative of plastics are actually known as biodegradable plastics and bioplastics. For example, when we talk about the biodegradable plastics, these are actually petroleum made materials. Now, to make it biodegradable, we will be applying various additives, various amounts of chemicals, or even biological aspects or biological entities. Now, these will be helping the plastic to make it biodegradable and also not leave any toxic residue. Now, on the other hand, when we talk about bioplastics, these are actually products which are made fully from biological substances such as corn, starch, recycled food waste and even wood chips. Now, after we process it under industrial appliances, we get a plastic where we do not have any aspects of petroleum based materials, right? So this kind of plastics are compostable. You can put it in a compost under the soil. Also, these can be used over and over again. These are recycled. So this is where you have to understand the aspect of biological materials or biomaterials. So sometimes these are wholly derived from biological entities such as bioplastic, and also sometimes these are engineered using various biological processes too. So this is exactly what will help us in various medical applications too. For example, in joint replacements or heart valves or skin repair devices, dental implants and various other aspects here, we can actually use biomaterials to serve the same purpose. For example, look at this teeth here. So this teeth is actually bioengineered and made using biomaterials. Now here, there are three types of biomaterials, very important for prelim guys. Firstly, drop-in biomaterials, which are actually identical to petroleum based versions. For example, when we talk about plastics here, these are actually forms of biopet or the example that we have discussed just now, right? Next are the dropout biomaterials. Now these are chemically different from the conventional ones. For example, the polylactic acid, the PLA, is actually made from starch or sugarcane. Right? Now, for example, with reference to those kind of bioplastics that we have discussed, they fall under this dropout biomaterials. And finally, we have noble biomaterials. These are completely new types of biomaterials with superpowers. For example, say these are self-healing medicines, bioactive implants. For example, these are those kind of, novel biomaterials where with more innovation and with more research and development, maybe we can also have organs totally made of biomaterials, right? So these are the three types that we have to keep in mind. Now, firstly, we have to understand that in India, we are trying to promote this ecosystem. But why in India we need this a lot? Firstly, because government of India tries to promote some motto which is known as Annadata to Urjdata. Now, this means that, for example, in India, we have an issue of stubble burning. Now, the stubble is a biological aspect, a biological waste. So, why not use it to make plastics? Right? So, we have Annadata, for example, we have the food security ambitions to be maintained, and that is why we will actually be left with a lot of stubble. But at the end of the day, when we try to convert into energy, or we try to convert into something which is more useful, we can have biomaterial engineering in this particular aspect. Also, when we talk about the fossil fuels which go into plastic production, we actually import a lot of petroleum and crude oil from the other countries, which actually goes on to the tune of more than $150 billion annually, guys. Right? So if we can try to make plastics using biological objects, it will be helpful for our own economy too. Also, when we talk about the Panchamrit goals, we have to achieve the various Panchamrit goals. You can mention in the comment below. That is mostly we have to complete them by 2030. Some of them, for example, we have to become net zero by 2070. So this is where this particular industry will help us. Also, the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism, which also has been covered in the Analyst recently. This also supports that we have to export more biodegradable substances to the EU, right? So that we have to pay less amount of carbon taxes. So this can save us. Also, in India, we recently also banned single-use plastic. So majorly, as of now, when we are talking about biomaterials, the major things are actually dependent on the plastic ecosystem too. So in India, as of 2024, the market value of biomaterial ecosystem is worth at around $500 million. Now here, there are so many startups such as Fool.co or various corporate companies such as Balrampur Chini Mills or the Praj Industries. All of these are actually involved in biomaterial manufacturing. But still, foreign technology is needed as of now in the country to actually do a lot better in this sector. Now that is where brings us to the food versus material debate. This means that as of now, whatever biological substances that we are using, for example, corn, sugarcane, these are food materials. So if we are using the food materials, this will be leading to feedstock crisis because sugarcane, corn, all these are actually used in food production or say food consumption in the country by even the human beings and the animals. Also, this infrastructure is actually with reference to the waste management and the composting system is not yet developed in the country. Also, with reference to the agricultural industry and the wastage, industrial wastage, all of these, when we talk about a particular unified policy, that is lacking. And that is why we need to actually bring in more research and development. We need to actually talk about more amount of, say, spending by the government on this biomaterial aspect, and we should try to improve the various regulatory definitions and norms in this sector. That is actually how we will be trying to promote more investments, more startups, more companies that can come under biomaterials. So this was all for this one. Now let us move on to the next. ISRO has announced various opportunities for scientists in the country with reference to the data that we have gotten from the Aditya L1. Now, Aditya L1 is a very important space mission of ISRO, making it very important for prelims and mains. Firstly, when we talk about Aditya L1, so Aditya L1 is a very specialized instrument with specialized equipments to look into the sun. Now, the Aditya L1, for example, if here it is the Earth, it is situated 1.5 million kilometers away. That is where the L1 Lagrange point is there. Now, here the Aditya L1 is in a halo orbit, that is, it is kind of orbiting this L1 site, because the L1 space or the L1 location away from the Earth is a very stable position, because if this is the Sun and this is the Earth, the L1 position is a very stable condition where the gravitational force of the Sun and the Earth is balanced, and that is where the Aditya L1 can naturally be in a orbit. So in this orbit, it can use its VELC or visible emission line coronagraph to look into the Sun's corona, that is the Sun's outer atmosphere, and also look into the coronal mass ejections, which are huge volumes of plasma gas ejected from the Sun, which also affect the weathers in our Earth too. Now, when we talk about the other equipment, that is a suit, this takes pictures of the Sun's photosphere and the chromosphere, which are the surface layers of the Sun, and this it does in UV light. It is important for your prelims, guys, and this actually helps us measure how intense the Sun's atmospheres are. There are other detectors also within Aditya L1. For example, the aspects and the PAPA, right? Now, this will be studying the solar wind and the plasma particle discharge due to the various coronal mass ejection. Also, the Solex and the Helios X-ray spectrometer is present there to look into the solar flares, and at the end of the day, a magnetometer is there to look into what are the various magnetic fields which are present at the L1 component here. Now, when we talk about the ISRO's recent initiative, now this is where they have announced various opportunities to invite Indian scientists and researchers to actually look into and analyze the data that we have gathered from the Aditya L1 so far. So there have been terabytes of data running into 23 terabytes of solar data that we have generated so far. Now ISRO is inviting someone come and study here and actually understand what is going on in the Sun. So this will help us become a leader in space data analytics, because space data is an emerging field and India can gain from that. Also, when we talk about Indian scientists and the various researchers, right, when ISRO is itself giving this kind of 23 terabytes of solar data free of cost to those kind of scientists who participate under this mission, so they will actually get data for their own research and study. Maybe there will be more Indian scientists who will be coming up with new discoveries. Also, space weather and the various data which is present here, that can enable us to make accurate predictions about our own Sun's atmosphere and its impact on Earth also. And at the end of the day, more amount of skills with reference to space building and the analysis of such satellites, this will be helping us to become a leader in the space sector in the future. Now on to the last one. Education Minister in the country has released 55 volumes of literary works, where some of them are very important for prelims, where I will be just mentioning them in the handout. Please look at those terms, and what is important for us is actually to look at the classical languages. Firstly, let us understand what is taking place. Firstly, 55 volumes, where 41 books by Centers of Excellence under Mysore, CIIL, and Chennai CICT, right, they have been kind of transformed, and also some disabled friendly features has been used here. For example, sign language series and also the various languages, they have been converted for actually making them more disabled friendly. Now, the languages which are covered right now recently are Kannada, Oriya, Telugu, Malayalam and Tamil. Now, the key theme is where we are trying to promote unity in diversity, because right now we are trying to move away from the Macaulay mindset. Guys, Macaulay was the primary man who kind of promoted English education in the country. In the comments, you let me know when that was and what exactly he proposed. Right now, the government of the day is trying to get rid of the colonial vestiges we still have, the mentalities that we still have, and that is why we are trying to re-release, reorient and try to redesign the various old classical works into the works or say the features that is easily acceptable and understandable by Indians today. So from the Tamil heritage, we have some books which you should definitely prepare well in details from your handout, because Tirukkural, Silapatikaram and other Sangam literature translations were very important also in the UPSC PYQs. So please do have a look into all of these and the names associated with those works. Also from the Oriya heritage, we have the Charpada, right, which is actually one of the precursors of Oriya, Bengali and even Assamese languages, right? So you need to actually understand these are actually 8th to 12th century Buddhist mystic songs. Also, there is another one which is known as Madal Panji, which is the official chronicle of the Lord Jagannath Mandir at Puri. Now, which is most important for us for UPSC is the aspect of classical language status. Now in India, we have presently 11 classical languages which are actually classified on 1, 2, 3, 4 characteristics by the Ministry of Culture. Firstly, that language must be highly antique. That means it must be having a history of around 1500 to 2000 years old. Also, that language must not be borrowed from other languages. That must be totally original. The literature must be venerated by generations over generations, and it must have a high value of the same, and it must be very distinct from the modern versions of those languages too. So as of now, if you can understand, in 2024, Assamese, Bengali, Marathi, Pali and Prakrit were added as classical languages. Before that, Tamil, Sanskrit, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam and Oriya was actually included in the classical languages list. Now there is a PYQ from 2014. Let me know what is the answer in the comments below. And here we conclude the discussion. I thank you all for being a very patient audience. We will be meeting very soon. Till then, you solve the quiz which is following up. All the best.